Mr. Rector, Mr. President, University authorities, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, la badiena. I'm sorry, my Lithuanian is very poor, but it's a great pleasure and gratitude for your honorary degree recognition that I would like to take this opportunity to share some consideration on two main aspects that I consider extremely relevant for our common European future. The first one concerns the international cooperation of universities as a powerful key for the scientific and socio-economic development of our social realities. The second one refers to the broader context under which universities are operating. This context is currently marked to a large extent by the renationalization of domestic and foreign policies either at the global level or within the European Union. Not surprisingly, a few years ago, Ulrich Beck emphasized the need of building a cosmopolitan Europe. In fact, the strategies so far implemented in order to encourage the internationalization of universities' curricula are generating vital actions in support of a prospectively transnational society. The Bologna process signifies this transitional effort, not without discrepancies and harsh criticisms for the increasing amount of bureaucracy. This process has, however, transformed the university structures and their teaching contents Europe-wide, making diplomas compatible and comparable. Since then, an amazing cross-national fertilization is marking the European Union with limited results, I would say only in the United Kingdom, most of its neighboring countries, the Russian Federation, and gradually the Central Asia. Moreover, as known, a European higher educational area is operating with the participation of 48 countries and the European Commission. This convergence engages a geopolitical and cultural space for beyond the number of EU member states, candidate and potential candidate countries. Patently, this is a confirmation that the advancement of research and knowledge has a wider dimension, which increasingly expands cooperation and exchanges across the borders. Few examples corroborates this assessment. 3.5 million of students have so far enjoyed a mobility experience thanks to the Erasmus program. A new document of the European Commission of last February 2018 suggests, among others, to double the funds for the Erasmus Plus under the budget of 2021-2028. Moreover, surveys confirm that the unemployment within the Erasmus generation is 23% lower than the non-mobile students 5 years after the graduation. Mixed couples intensify up to 33% of the alumni. The sense of European citizenship is shared by the 91% of young mobile respondents. Finally, the negative reaction of the Erasmus generation in London against the results of the Brexit referendum and the demand of both the mayor and the city to enjoy a special status within the EU after the Brexit are blatant confirmations of this new cultural context. But the internationalization of the university is not only about mobility. Methodologically, it's also about networking. Networking is a form of scholarly cooperation that offers vital opportunities to cope with a plurality of angles and to look at the world with a variety of lenses. Consistently, it also stimulates cross-national fertilization, interdisciplinary approaches, additional forms of mobility, a higher education exchange of knowledge, as well as cooperation of contacts, interests, and memories. As a result, Networking enhances both trust and empathy through programs that involve universities, cities, public administrations, enterprises, and stakeholders at large. In this framework, a specific role is played by joint international teaching programs, double and joint diplomas, that university networks are able to award to their shared students. This form of cooperation, despite the difficulties in implementation, due partly to the still different legislations and sometimes also to the mental resistance of internal regulations and staff, represent an extraordinary opportunity for education and training. They offer a radically new international environment. By attracting students and the faculty from different countries, they develop not only multiple forms of mobility, but also a variety of methods of teaching, multilingualism, new habits and lifestyles, as well as a solid preparation to operate in a globalized world seen as an opportunity rather than a menace. Under these circumstances, the process of learning does not include only the acquisition of scientific context, either in the humanities and social sciences or in the hard sciences, but also a set of transversal skills crucially relevant for the labor market as adaptability, communication competencies, ability to work under stress, organizational expertise in international environment, analytical capacity, and social sensibility. In other words, the need for an interdisciplinary education is increasingly emerging, raising new questions about academic approaches and social needs. In the 90s, for example, the University of Stanford elaborated the triple helix concept in order to give priority to a narrow link among universities, enterprises, and public administration. Basically, the idea was to give special strength to the entrepreneurial dimension of the universities, with the aim to serve the needs of industries and governments. This priority defined the interdisciplinary boundaries in terms of internal competitiveness and requirements, leaving therefore social sciences and humanities to the margin of the educational system, while the management of the universities was understood to be reconstructed as business. By contrast, the development of new communication systems, IT, digital platforms, and big data encouraged UNESCO to express concerns about the potential development of the learning system. In 1996, a report revised in 2013 focused on four main pillars synthetically articulated in learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. The aim was to endorse the internationalization of universities and networking strategies, avoiding risks of marketization and commercialization of educational services. More recently, another important step has been made by the Council of Europe with the implementation of the project on competencies for democratic culture. The novelty of this approach lies particularly on the recognition that social sciences and humanities matter for the techno-scientific education as well, since democratic values, equality, justice, fairness, human rights, and understanding diversities are crucially relevant for the peaceful development of our societies. According to this approach, our future managers, entrepreneurs, architects, physicists, financial advisors, just to mention a few, cannot ignore them. As reported in one of the documents issued by the teamwork of the Council of Europe, the aim is not, and I'm quoting, to teach students what to think, but rather how to think, in order to navigate a world where not everyone holds their views, but we each have a duty to uphold the democratic principle which allow all cultures to coexist. End of the quotation. Admittedly, it is not easy to convince colleagues who, for example, are coordinating programs in engineering, biology, or medicine to include a course on democratic competencies with the support of colleagues from social sciences and humanities. But this is a new educational frontier and should not be avoided. In fact, it is our task as lecturers and educators to prepare the young generation that is the future leading elites of our countries, not only to face the radical changes of the labor market with a strong technical and scientific command, but also to be cultivated citizens, equally well aware of their rights and duties, as well as of the societal challenges of our time. Consistently, they need adequate cultural tools for understanding either the social and substantial impact of their behaviors and decisions in their workplace, or the nature of the developments that mark our common life. To sum up, they are expected to actively contribute with their social engagement to the vitality of the democratic institutions and the coexistence of differences. These considerations led me to refer to a series of dynamics that are currently challenges our societies. In the last 2 decades, I particularly focused my studies on the geopolitical impact of liquid nationalism, as on the social coexistence in Europe. Why, in fact, I connected nationalism to liquidity? Definitely, I have been inspired by the seminal works of Zygmunt Bauman, and particularly by his book on liquid modernity, when he explains how social links regularly melt and later solidify under new conditions anytime a crucial change marks the development of the humanity, as, for example, when the Middle Ages culture, labor organizations and institutions liquefied, paving the way for new amalgamations that forged modernity. Crucially, nationalism is not a static ideology, nor a mere political program. Rather, it's a notion which has produced opposite views in interpretations, as well as a plurality of impacts during its historical trajectory. As a result, as ice melt into the water under determined conditions, similarly nationalism, under specific circumstances, liquefies pre-existing social links, sense of belonging, cultural awareness of individuals and groups, by re-establishing new forms of solidification that might liquefy once again, following further unexpected mechanisms and legal, territorial, institutional, and cultural demands. For example, according to the context and the power politics developments, nationalism has encouraged either integration of regions and microstates or secessionism and ethnic or regional partitions. Nationalism has produced demands for freedom and equality, as well as the basic conditions for the development of democratic institutions and the public participation in the selection of the elite. However, it has also encouraged demands of collective purity protection, rejection of otherness, supremacist behaviors, ethnic cleansing, race superiority, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia. Shortly said, nationalism is a liquid form of politics, which encompasses state ideologies and yearnings of liberty, revolutionary ideas, and endless claims for independence worldwide. In these developments, it has justified and still legitimizes violence, race superiority, ethnic cleansing, incorporation of territories, by coalescing with patriotism and religiosity, even at the cost of distorting their original values. In my view, the dynamic of these multiple flows can effectively be represented by the concepts of liquidity and fluidity. In this regard, Europe was and still is affected by a wide range of aspiration for independence in connection with its cultural varieties of territories and populations. I had the chance to discuss several times about these topics with a great friend and a prominent scholar with an international reputation, as Leonidas Donskis was. I owe him important stimuli, the encouragement to expand my studies to the Baltic region and the complexity of its dynamics. I am particularly glad to pay a tribute to his memory in this remarkable academic environment. During our discussion, we categorized partitions according to economic, religious, ethnic, linguistic impulses, or power politics disputations. The recent history of Europe is full of examples in this sense, from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, partition, to the Irish experience, from the collapse of empires, Central European, Russian, Ottoman, or colonial ones, to the post-communist liquefaction of the socialist federations. Most recently, similar trends are affecting the European Union with the Brexit, the United Kingdom, Spain, and Ukraine. What is surprising to me is that the category of state partition is not popular, if not neglected by the European literature, while it is extensively elaborated in India, Southeast Asia, and among British scholars with Indian origin, who apply the category mainly to the post-colonial events in Asia. If you look at the university syllabi of the courses that refer to state partitions, you will see how the focus is on Asia, while Europe is rarely mentioned. In the last 2 decades, I had the chance to make joint researches with colleagues and friends interested to scrutinize the concept with interdisciplinary approaches, but to a large extent, these colleagues gave priority to Asian studies, with few exceptions that concerned the bloody collapse of Yugoslavia and more recently, the case of Scotland. For this reason, I decided to concentrate on Europe and bridge a cultural gap in the international literature. On the other hand, treating world relationships on the basis of the nation-state framework of reference is by now obsolete and vain. Macro-regional integration in a globalized and interdependent world is now the new frontier for humanity. Diversity management and deliberation might be an effective tool for building new decision-making process able to accept cultural syncretism and nomadism, métissage, gender diversity, secularism. By contrast, rarely the relation between nationalism and democracy is raised in the public discourse, probably because the relation is taken for granted due to the rooted belief that national freedom is, or should be, an expression of democracy. Nevertheless, the nexus is also contested, because it is unclear who and what is granting the respect of democratic will of a group. The recent contested arguments about the referenda in Crimea and Catalonia are a patent evidence of that. As a result, few raise the question to what extent state partition and national appeals affect the nature of democracy, and particularly the individual right to express dissent, rejection of homologation and homogeneity without being treated as enemy of the people. Meanwhile, like it or not, our societies are radically changing. The recent massive flows of asylum seekers and migrants that entered into Europe across the Mediterranean and Aegean seas, shaking so deeply political leaders and a wide spectrum of social strata, either within the European member states or the United States, from Mexico and Latin America, is only the tip of the iceberg. That is an event, among others, that is challenging the form of the nation state, which is facing a long, painful, and contentious phase of liquefaction. The challenges of globalization have a crucial impact on this process. Suffice here to mention the demographic decline of the northern hemisphere of the Earth, the population of wide regions, together with an increasingly low birth rate versus an escalation of asylum seekers and migration flows. the effects of the climate change on the quality of growth and production, as well as the need of identifying sustainable sources for development, together with the diversification of energy sources, the long-term impact that these trends have on the job offer, the available manpower, and the access to adequate labor. Furthermore, the broad international context is affected by the imbalances that are recorded between the declining Western moral authority and the raising of multiple geopolitical players like Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, India, South Africa, and Brazil. All of these events have a decisive impact on the existing societies, whose heterogeneity is doomed to growth in patent conflict with the alleged homogeneity of the nation state. The growing protagonist social role of women, their relevance in a plurality of sectors, from education to production, including their leading roles in corporation, board of trustees, or in the political life, produce vital demands for the reorganization of labor and new social relations in order to respect gender differences and gender needs. The progress of medicine is modifying in depth lifestyles, family planning, family organizations, hetero and homo, traditional cultures and habits. IT connections, low-cost flights, and high-speed trains are radically compressing space and time, with indisputable effects on mental geographies by approaching urban centers while moving away the countryside and the provinces. The Bologna process, the Erasmus+, multilingualism, and the mobility of the highly educated elites that I mentioned in the first part of my presentation are also eroding the sense of borders, enhancing neo-nomadism and transnational links. The diversification with coexistence of religious beliefs, the demands for the respect of new civil rights, from gender equality and against female mutilation to equality for LGBT communities, from the respect to the end of life, including euthanasia, to the indigenous life protection and environmental preservation, all these phenomena do contribute to minimize the role of state borders while increasing the diversity of the existing societies. However, these changes will not be accepted peacefully. Evidences show that resistance is growing. This can lead to transnational conflicts and severe social polarizations between globalized and neo-nationalist stances, between highly and transnational educated people and local, monolingual, poorly educated populations. Such a potentially conflicting dichotomy may affect not so much the relations among states, as occurred in the historical experience so far achieved, how much the domestic stability of the societies and the peaceful development of democracy. In fact, democracy is increasingly expected to come to terms with its profound nature, that is, whether it should remain limited within culturally, ethnically, and or religiously homogeneous communities, however constructed, or should it expand to answer the needs of diversified societies by managing diversities, granting syncretism, intercultural interdependence and evolution, métissage, neo-nomadism, multi-religious faiths, multiple lifestyles, gender and sexual orientation rights that globalization is stimulating worldwide. Admittedly, the evolution of this dichotomy remains unpredictable. It may lead to civil transnational wars, as the French President Macron evoked recently at the European Parliament, or social unrest and new state partitions. These are great challenges, and they will affect mostly the life of young generations. It is therefore our responsibility as scholars and educators to equip them in the most rich, interdisciplinary, and dialogical way to face the undergoing societal transformation by preserving peace and encouraging sustainable development. It is a very difficult task that does not allow shortcuts, but requires the expansion of lifelong educational programs, social engagement, international cooperation of schools and higher education institutions. Although politics often undermines this strategic perspective, it is highly encouraging the proposal of the EU Commission to increase the expenses for education in the next budgetary period of 2021-2027. Hopefully, the European Council will support this courageous decision. On the other hand, the academic community is expected to actively contribute to the construction of new solid bodies in the current fluid and disordered world. The internationalization of the universities, the transnational dialogue and cooperation that they can promote together with the interaction among hard sciences, humanities, and social sciences are prospectively offering great room for experimenting new forms of education to the benefit of new generations. To conclude, our academic world faces a tremendous task. However, as educators at large, we have the opportunity and the tools to confront it successfully if the scientific and organizational autonomy of the university will be preserved and respected, as stated in the Magna Carta Universitatum, so far signed by 816 universities from 86 countries worldwide. University autonomy is not a privilege. On the contrary, it is a precondition for enhancing international education and research. It ensures the basic requirements to make the universities the breeding ground for innovation, free thinking, European and cosmopolitan cultures, and peace. Admittedly, this perspective does not appeal to many. However, it represents the most effective tool we have to train people to manage democratically globalization. As universal educators, it is our task to sow the seeds and make the intelligences flourish. Thank you for your attention. Achoo.